When you hear the name Al Capone, you think of violence, chaos, and the fear that gripped Chicago in the early 20th century. But behind the guns and the headlines was something much more powerful, a business. Not some small-time hustle, but one of the most profitable supply chains America had ever seen. And the reason it existed had nothing to do with free markets or creativity. It existed because the government unintentionally built it. When Prohibition began in 1920, lawmakers thought they were fixing society. They argued that alcohol was the root of broken families, crime, and poverty. Ban it, and everything would get better. The idea sounded moral, but it ignored one essential truth. People still wanted to drink. The demand didn't just disappear. It grew, and when demand stays alive while the legal supply vanishes, an invisible market begins to form. That invisible space became Al Capone's empire. Capone grew up in Brooklyn, the son of Italian immigrants, and he was no stranger to the rough edges of street life. But Chicago during Prohibition wasn't just another city. It was an economic frontier. Legal competition disappeared overnight, and in its place, a massive vacuum opened up, large enough to build a fortune in. Capone stepped into that vacuum with an ambition few could match. What he built wasn't just a gang. It was an organization. He had breweries manufacturing the product and distilleries creating the supply. Smuggling routes brought in shipments from Canada and the Caribbean. Distribution was mapped, protected, and operated like a corporation. Hundreds of speakeasies, secret bars, hidden behind the facades of soda parlors and clubs, paid for access to Capone's steady stream of liquor. Before long, his operation was generating tens of millions of dollars a year. Adjusted for today's value, that would rival billion-dollar revenues. Yet Capone understood another truth. Power requires legitimacy. Illegal money alone doesn't protect you. So he poured his profits into restaurants, nightclubs, and other businesses that made his wealth look clean. These weren't just fronts, they were anchors. They stabilized his influence, spread his reputation, and connected him to the city's political machine. Bribes flowed upward to officials, and protection flowed downward to his operations. In a city where half the economy had been pushed underground, Capone started to seem less like a criminal and more like a necessary force. The secret behind his riches was simple economics. Before Prohibition, alcohol was cheap. Beer was everywhere, wine was accessible, and whiskey was just another product on the shelf. But once it was banned, every risk added a new price tag. Transporting it was a risk. Storing it was a risk. Paying the right people for silence was a risk. And every single one of those risks raised the cost. What was once an ordinary commodity became a high-margin luxury good. And people were more than willing to pay. Capone recognized that you can't just erase demand with a law. When the legal market disappears, an illegal one becomes incredibly profitable. He didn't fight the system. He monetized the gap inside it. But he also knew that the same system that created his empire could destroy it. If alcohol ever became legal again, his massive profit margins would evaporate. So he expanded his interests into gambling, prostitution, and protection networks. These weren't just improvisations, they were insurance policies. But alcohol remained the central pillar because nothing else produced such enormous profits. But no empire built on regulation can survive regulation forever. As the Great Depression worsened, America needed tax revenue more than it needed moral policies. Legalizing alcohol offered an obvious solution. And as public opinion shifted, so did Washington's priorities. Capone wasn't just a Chicago figure anymore. He was a national symbol of the lawlessness created by Prohibition. Bringing him down became a political mission. His operations were too well protected to convict him for bootlegging. So, federal authorities targeted the one thing he couldn't hide: his taxes. In 1931, he was sentenced for tax evasion. And in that single moment, the empire he had spent years optimizing was irreversibly damaged. Not by a rival gang or a shootout, but by paperwork. 2 years later, Prohibition ended. Legal breweries reopened. The underground economy collapsed. Prices normalized. And the market that had once created millionaires vanished almost instantly. What had been one of the largest criminal industries in American history became a taxable, legitimate business overnight. But this story isn't really about Al Capone. It's about economics. Prohibition didn't fail because criminals were strong. It failed because the underlying math was stronger. The government tried to eliminate supply without eliminating demand. And whenever that happens, a new market is born, one controlled by people willing to cross the line. That same pattern is still alive today. Look at how cannabis moved from underground networks to publicly traded corporations. Cryptocurrency grew in regulatory gray zones before institutions finally entered. Industries shaped by sanctions, energy restrictions, and environmental rules all operate in that space between law and demand. And the profits always flow to those who recognize the gap first. Capone succeeded because he understood the forces shaping his environment. He fell because that environment changed faster than he could adapt. The lesson extends far beyond crime. It applies to investors, entrepreneurs, and policymakers today. Markets aren't just markets. They are ecosystems shaped by rules, pressure, scarcity, and opportunity. And wherever artificial scarcity exists, created by law, policy, or limits someone, will find a way to profit from it. Understanding that pattern doesn't make you a criminal. It makes you aware. And awareness is one of the most powerful financial tools you can have in the modern world. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. At Legacy of Money, we explore the forces that move markets and the hidden mechanics that shape real power. Thanks for watching.